where's your hair? I know, well, I just got my, come. She literally dragged me and said, you have to take me there. So you know what we had to do? She actually went to the barber shop, swept up the hair, bring it home and brought it home. She said, never ever leave your hair with anybody. I said, why, ma? She said, oh, you don't know what our people can do. If they get your hair, before you know, something is going to happen to you, and I can't allow that. The respect that we have in our culture is so amazing. It's compelling enough to make you feel like I'm with my cousins who have a fraction of the opportunities I've had. They have, I would say, 10 times the brain and compassion and wisdom. And there's me in the sort of quote-unquote rich West not making the most of it. And if my cousins were in my place, I kept just thinking, and I just felt a sense of honor to that.
Africa eviction, this is our mission. We need to spice up the whole nation.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the Ronu Spirit Podcast, where you follow my learning journey as I explore potential ways to empower African nations and address the legacy of colonization, as well as enhance the global respect for Black and African people worldwide. My name is Hameed. And as usual, we have Dr. Samara Farha in the background. One of these days, I'm going to get that pronunciation right. She is serving as my clarity coach.
Hello,
so
everyone.
Say hi. Today's guest is Paul Anderson MBE. Mr. Anderson is now the CEO of Voyage, a social justice charity supporting young Black people based in Hackney, equipping them with the skills and networks needed to succeed in industries where they are underrepresented. He is of Nigerian descent and very much in touch with his roots. In 2003, he helped raise 14.5 million to establish the UK Centre for Carnival Arts, which is the UKCCA. It was also the country's first dedicated centre to carnival arts. So welcome to the podcast, Paul.
Thank you, Hameed. And I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you. And thank you, Samara, as well.
Awesome. Let's start with, where should we begin? I want to start with your origins, your identity growing up in London, and what got you into the work that you're doing today, which is basically helping the Black youth in London.
Oh, wow. Gosh. I was one of these young people that got into a lot of trouble as a young person in my neighbourhood. I lived in a really odd place, which was Highbury in Islington. And in those days, we kind of sat in the middle grounds between the kind of really tough estates. I liked those tough estates, and they just had a big draw for me. And all my friends lived there. So I ended up becoming quite associated with a lot of people. I wasn't aligned to any particular quote unquote gang, but I just got involved in lots of problems and lots of youth conflict issues and the usual things that kind of spun off that. That led to a bit of a tough time kind of growing up. I spent a bit of time in Chelmsford. I had to actually go into the adult prison, which was a huge shock for a 19-year-old just coming out of being excluded from school, having a little bit of a sort of tough kind of life. I was working in between all of that, with working in furniture shops and all sorts of things, working with lots of amazing people. But at the nighttime and the weekends, I kind of went astray. And that sort of experience around the criminal justice system and being arrested a lot and then coming out, my youth workers approached me and asked me to kind of give a talk to some of the new kids coming into the youth club. And they said, why don't you give them a talk just to sort of tell them what you did and what happened? And they said to me, Paul, you got a bit of a gift. You can talk to young people, you can connect with them. I think they use words like sincere and all that kind of stuff.
Authentic.
Yeah, that's the word. It was like that type of stuff. And I said, yeah, I don't mind. And they said, do you know that you can do this work? It's like youth work doesn't necessarily require all of these qualifications and stuff. And it sort of seems like quite a natural progression of what you do and what you talk about. Would you like to do it? And I sort of said, yeah. And they asked me to do some voluntary work. And then I remember there was a course that was run by the North London Polytechnic. And the North London Polytechnic course was called Race, Community and Society. And I was just so intrigued by that. And I went to that course. And part of the course, you had to go off and do more voluntary work. And then I went to work for Camden. And that led to me getting a job in Camden in the youth services in Islington and Camden. I had those two jobs. And I was like, oh, wow, you can actually get paid to talk to young people. And that was like quite weird. It was just, I didn't know you could actually be paid for this. And I didn't realize my youth workers were actually paid as well.
Incredible.
And I ended up becoming trained. I went back to night school. I remember when I was about 20, I signed up to a lot of night school. I did some arts classes because I'm a little bit creative as well. So I did lots of other kind of qualifications and courses, and that sort of kept me in the conversation with my seniors. And I ended up doing a sort of social worker course, but it was part of a sort of, I think it was called Set Soir, something like that. did aspects of that, and that actually got me into criminal justice. And I became a coach working with young people through probation. And then I got into youth justice, and then I ended up becoming a youth justice worker. And then from that, I became linked to a big regeneration project in Camden, and they needed ideas for the community for a regeneration project in the very early 90s. We won something like 28 million, and they offered me one of the jobs to run of the projects that I developed. I sort of said, no, this is crazy. I wrote 6, and it led me to getting a job managing 6 programs. And I stayed in that neighborhood for about 7 years, running a whole range of things like community festivals, community outreach projects, youth club stuff, and a whole range of outreach programs sort of supporting kids from all different parts and different backgrounds.
Let's take it back a bit to when you were young and you were growing up in Highbury and Islington, between these 2 estates, getting into a little bit of trouble. You are of Nigerian descent. Your parents, what was the makeup with your parents? Was it your dad that was Nigerian, or was it your mum?
Yeah. Oh, my dad was a very authoritarian Nigerian. My mum and dad split up, and I was at that critical phase transitioning from very much from primary school to secondary school. And at that point, I felt that's where you need that sort of parenting, that sort of tough love. And that wasn't there. And for somebody who's coming out of that, almost rejecting that as well, being younger, I think that's what kind of set me out. My dad was not around in that critical period. And I think that's where I ended up sort of trying to make my own play in the world, and without the advice and guidance of my dad. But my dad was very central, because although he came back when I was about 16, we built a little bit of a relationship back. So I had him in the background, and he was always trying to advise me, don't do this, don't do that, and this is where we're going to end up. And I never forget when I came out of Chelmsford and woke up one morning, my dad was just there in the room. And I just remember his words so clearly about, and I don't want to do the accent.
You can try. Go ahead.
He just said, what did I tell you? What has become of that? I was looking at him with no words. I kind of just remembered that moment so much. I think I must have probably cried for about 10 days after, constantly realizing how foolish I was. But my dad was such an amazing guy, a very eloquent individual, and also just somebody who was very connected back home, and said, because my uncles, my aunties, he said, look, you need to go and see your cousins. Like, I think this is the time. And if you don't, it's going to be, I don't know what's going to become of you. And I sort of said, I trusted him. So I wrote to my uncle Joe, and I wrote this letter to him saying, thinking of coming back. The way he wrote back, my uncle wrote back, was just the most beautiful letter ever. You can imagine. You are mine. Or, what do you mean?
So when you say thinking of coming back, you mean going back to Nigeria? Oh, I see. So you went back to Nigeria?
Yeah. So
how long?
I went 3 months.
Okay.
Literally, that was it.
Was it life-changing?
It was life-changing, man.
Just those 3 months?
Just those 3 months, yeah.
Wow.
Just those 3 months felt like a year. It was quite tough initially, because obviously I wasn't used to mosquitoes. I wasn't used to the lifestyle and stuff like that. But I saw Fela. I went to the shrine.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I saw things that people are talking about today. I was there. I saw there.
Wait, so you saw him perform live?
Why not? Of course. I was there. We hung out.
Hey, right now on the hoodie that I'm wearing, we have Fela on the back.
Is it?
It's a Fela design hoodie. Let me try to show you. Hold on. Hold on.
Oh, that is really cool.
Oh my God. Yeah. That's lovely. Yeah.
Very appropriate.
I can. And you know what? I never forget how scared I was, because my cousin was saying, he's going to yab you. He's going to yab you. So I was.
What does that mean?
Like yabbing. Like his style was, you come into the shrine. And when you're in the shrine, you sit down, and he's playing his music, he's talking, you've got your dancers left and right, everything's just bubbling, everything's just popping off. And he would just say, hey, you, they're sitting down. And he would just come with some words, and you'd be like, what? And he would just say, oh, so what? He would just make fun of you. Yeah. That's what he means by yab. So you got yab, you finished. I was so scared that would happen.
Did that happen to you?
No, it didn't. I was so cool. But I used to swim at the airport hotel, and literally we used to always come back and end up at the shrine, and then stay there until it got a bit crazy, and then we rushed off to come home. Because
what year was this?
I went to Nigeria in 1991.
Wow.
Yeah.
I was a baby then.
So I was in Ghana before that in 1989.
Okay.
My best friend, he's half Ghanaian, so I went there first, and it was kind of weird because I didn't want to tell my dad I went there first. I was kind of holding that back from him. The actual thing that tripped me was my cousins. That when I went home, because I'm the oldest son from the oldest son, reverence is just key. Like they would come off the bed, they wouldn't even, so I'd sleep on their bed, they'd sleep on the floor, they would make food for me.
Respect, yeah?
Wow. The respect that we have in our culture is so amazing. It's compelling enough to make you feel like, hang on, I'm with my cousins who have a fraction of the opportunities I've had. They have, I would say, 10 times the brain and compassion and wisdom. And there's me in the sort of quote unquote rich West, not making the most of it. And if my cousins were in my place, only, and that's what I kept just thinking, and I just felt a sense of honor to that, and I just felt there's no way I can go back to the UK and be a loser and hang out with the guys and get into trouble again, and that was it.
Amazing.
Literally from that point, my whole life just changed. Never been arrested, never got in trouble. I've always had money in my pocket. I was able to do things like buy houses and invest in things. And as a result, I'm just so grateful. That whole connection with home, I think, has been a huge driving force for my overall
Definitely. Sounds very pivotal. And what would life be had you not gone to Nigeria for that 3 months, right?
It's the holding of who you are. It's that sort of knowledge of who you are. And I'm still in touch with my cousins, in touch with them almost every other day. One of them's here now. He has a family. I managed to get him here. His younger one is still there. Aki is my name, saying he's there. And they're a huge motivating force for me. And that connection, I'm always embarrassed because I can't speak the language still to this very day. But I give them all of the usual stuff they talk.
all the usual phrases. Like Bawoni.
Those are we've got our inner phrases because I used to go every year for probably about 12 years after that. I never missed
Oh wow.
And one of the things that we have these sort of codes, like, because we used to call it make like a chicken. Our street where we live is DB Street in Abeson, which is in Yanapaja. I don't know if you know.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
I know of Yanapaja. I don't know it like that. I'm not.
You're more like, I'm sure, Ikoyi and all those places there.
I wish I was that rich. But yes, I am more familiar with those type of areas.
Yes, exactly. It was kind of like we would just get into the rituals of greeting Arnold's. The moment we left the house, right the way to bus stop or to Federal Estate Gate or somewhere like that before. And we used to just nod to people and people used to call us from far. I knew everybody in my uncle's street, especially in DB Street, which is the name of the street. It doesn't have a name, it's a number and some letters.
What's so amazing is that it feels like when you went to Nigeria, what your experience was like, when I say it takes a village to raise someone, that community.
Yeah.
Do you think that community played a huge role in helping you to decide and change your direction and so on, like having that community around you? And if so, how do you think that can be replicated in the work you're doing now with the youth of today?
Yeah, I think there's something about the sort of positive role modeling. Like leadership in Nigeria, and especially in Yoruba culture, is essential. You have to have a position. You are allocated a position. By design.
Respect is, everything is by
hierarchy.
when you came into this earth. Hierarchy. Very hierarchical,
and you kind of learn that the importance of that, really. I think there's something about how that creates a kind of ecosystem of support. And even if it's not just direct support, it's knowing your place and having to sort of quickly adjust yourself to that position instantly. Like one minute you're talking to somebody younger than you in a certain language, and the next minute elder will pass, the next minute you will drop down, and that person will drop down even further and give what's happening. And it is that kind of order and that sense of respect just really kind of grounds you. I think there's also a kind of spiritual side as well, which I remember more because there was something in stories which like told you things that were much more deeper and connected. And I remember once I first got my hair cut and I went to a barber about into the estate area, which is opposite from where we were staying. I came home, my auntie said, "Oh, your hair, where's your hair?" I said, "Oh, I just got my hair." She literally dragged me and said, "You have to take me there." So you know what we had to do? She actually went to the barber shop, swept up the hair, and brought it home. She said, "Never ever leave your hair with anybody." I said, "Why, ma?" She said, "Oh, you don't know what our people can do. If they get your hair, before you know, something is going to happen to you, and I can't allow that."
Yeah.
And you know, that kind of protection. So we're not just talking about them giving their homes, giving beds, giving the respect, but then that sort of guardianship of that your spirit.
Yeah.
That was just too deep, man. And I just said to myself, "Whoa, auntie." My auntie Betty's, my Uncle Joe's passed, but she's still alive and she's amazing. She told me all the stories about juju and witchcraft and things like that. And they call me Ajala back home because I like to travel. I don't know if you remember one song called Ajala, we like to travel all over the world. It's a person. That song, my auntie calls me that because when I go, I can't stay in the house. I'll be there one day before I'm traveling here. So yeah, that kind of guardianship kind of creates that sense of, so you got a village, which is the physical place, but you also got the other bit around the spirituality, which kind of lets you connect, that you're connected to something much bigger than those that are immediately around you.
How can we take elements of that and try to recreate it with Voyage, which is the work that you're doing now?
I've always said most of our kids need to come back home. I think that's the kind of a missing thing in a lot of our kids. And I think finances have an awful lot to do with that. I think back in my day, flights and stuff there was that sort of calibration between your income, your ability to be able to do that. Whereas today it's kind of gone. It's so out of step. So parents, like even me, my children, I've taken all of my kids to our home in Ghana where I have my second home. And I wasn't able to continue that until when they all got to a certain age, over 7 and 8, because they always at 9 and 10 where they became more adult. It becomes really difficult, but almost impossible. And the importance of it for me was you get a sense of place, you get a sense of pride. And I think that's what I've always tried to do. And I think traveling there is one thing, but having a connection is more important. I've been trying to think about how we can connect it with our programs, and one of them is through an international development framework. I've always felt that we need to, but as the European funds have dried up, so that it can't happen anymore. They used to have a wild card.
Is that because of Brexit?
Yeah, because of Brexit, they've taken that out. And the wild card element of it would be you could apply to do an exchange between Croatia, Lithuania and London, and then you would choose a wild card country that could be brought in as a sort of fourth wheel. And that ran out, so that doesn't happen anymore. You
mentioned that you think the kids need to, like the young adults in your youth communities, in your projects and from Voyage and all the other youth communities out there, would benefit from going back home. When you went back home, you had connection because you had family. So you were very embraced. Do you think they will be able to be embraced like that? Is there a thing that can be set up so that they feel something similar to what you felt?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you're absolutely right, though. I am quite fortunate in a sense of that connection exists and is still there. And a lot of the kids that we work with come from kind of war-torn countries, for example. It could be parts of Africa, which are really expensive. We know the DRC Congo situation, Sudan situation, also Mali and so on. I think the infrastructure slightly in Africa is changing, but I think there is something about being connected to something that actually is the future. And that's what I didn't really understand until I got a bit older, that Africa is the future, is going to be the thing that every country needs to have a connection with. And I kind of sensed that early days, that everything's here, but actually, why is it all here in the West? When it actually originates here.
You also mentioned the thing about identity. You said something along the lines of given that sense of pride and that sense of identity you got when you went over there. Do you think that's something that's lacking in our youth, in the UK in general?
Yeah,
like the pride in your own identity?
Definitely. I felt like it helped with that sense of who you are, why you think the way you do, why you may even have slight alternative thoughts that are different from your other people and your peers. And I think having that connection with your ancestry can tell you things that you can't quite conceive about things when you're thinking about them practically, logically, or supposing comparing yourself with other people. It gives you a kind of new lens by which you can sort of be aware of yourselves. And I think that's kind of what it did. And I think you can't fathom that while it's happening. And I think this is just an older person talking about what must have happened. There's a sort of sense of passion and pride that you come from a place. Like I know my middle name is Akimpelu. I knew what that stood for. My name stands for somebody with valor has walked into the room, which is kind of like a bit weird and long. But it's like, your dad names you for a reason, and there's a connection with that. When you get close to what that name means and you understand the cultural context of that, you kind of think, I've got to live by that. I've been one of these sort of people, I've never been scared to go anywhere in the world on my own and just forge that path wherever I felt I needed to go. And I think that sense of that spiritual connection and that understanding about your name and all those things have really empowered that journey. It's almost like I've got to be true to my name.
It's like a commitment. that you've made to yourself. I think everything you've shared is a good example of when you are of dual heritage and you go back to your home country and find a connection. And I do think everything you've been saying, I've been thinking it's the same in the Indian culture when it comes to our names. And generally, everything you talk about is very collectivist. People of the global majority are from collectivist cultures. And that's something that is lacking here in the UK because we are just so focused in an individualistic society that even though we come from collectivist cultures, we embody more of the individualism. And I think people in their formative years really struggle with their identity. And when it comes to the other side, not giving age out or whatever, but you do have a sense of appreciation of your culture. So I think it's a journey of discovery, but you don't realize the importance of it until, like, in hindsight, it's something that you discover. So I think if we could promote that with young adults to get them to understand that actually you don't have to pick and choose and you can consolidate your different identities in a way that's unique to you, then it can be really helpful.
100%. I mean, in small ways, like we named some of our projects, for example, like one of them, we named it Sankofa, for example. We tried to come up with concepts that kind of get kids questioning, what does this mean? Like, why do you give it that name? What's the idea behind it? And you try and find kind of just fun ways to kind of get kids talking about the culture. So, for example, when they come in, we always ask, what's your name? No, what's your name? You know, that one. And they go, oh, no, I'm not telling you. And then you would tell them, oh, my name is this. And then all of a sudden they go, oh, okay then. So you got one of them and all. Like, yeah. Because mostly kids think I'm like Caribbean or something. They will ask that. They'll be a bit shy. And look at my name. It's Paul Anderson. It's like I could be some white guy on the end of the... That's kind of been good. Just to flip it slightly. My mum is Estonian. My mum and dad met in the 60s because my mum migrated from Estonia to Australia. And because of that kind of journey, she became a Commonwealth citizen, and so did my dad through Nigeria, because Nigeria was a Commonwealth country as well. And in those days, the Commonwealth Institute used to facilitate gatherings of families, and that's how my mum and dad met. Equally, I've been to my mum's country several times, and I know family there too. And I think what I've taken from a lot of my experience in Africa is like knowing yourself in all dimensions that exist only serve to just empower you and make you stronger.
Amazing. This is actually a very good point you're raising. I actually was part of a delegation that went to Africa. It's a program called Future Bus, which basically got Black entrepreneurs from the UK that were working on interesting subjects and businesses. And as part of that program, we had a time where we had a trip that was sponsored to Uganda to visit and explore and connect with other entrepreneurs in Uganda and visit various businesses, just explore the place, speak to the bank. It felt amazing. And I'd never been to Uganda before then. So even for me, who I've been to Africa plenty of times, it still felt incredible. There were those within the cohort that were of Caribbean descent as well. And I'd never been to Africa in general. And they just felt like, just that the experience was like a week, but just the experience of being welcomed, going to all those different places, seeing the businesses and the moves that are happening on the continent, they felt, this decided to feel pride as well. I mean, so I think something like that could also be useful for Voyage. If that's something that, I don't know, you're interested in or might be looking to do, I feel like it's something that if you picked a select few kids that and then created a program for them to pick the country in Africa, created a program for them to go in and explore and visit that program, see the nation and just see a different side to the world.
Oh, wow. Certainly. One of the reasons why my home exists in Ghana is because I wanted to create that experience there. So I built my own home, but I've been working on a sort of broader plan of guest houses and things of that nature. So one of the sort of things I've said is perhaps part of my kind of exit from Voyage will be to bring a whole group of kids there. And I kind of, that journey would be sort of almost in the sense that I've now brought a new group of kids now to kind of come back to the UK, and then I can say, I'm here now. Yeah, you guys get on with it back home in the UK. Yeah. But yeah, that is very much part of my plan. And in many respects, a lot of what I've been trying to do in Africa is to try to get that to be a sort of a business that I can work on and actually use that as a basis for kind of extending the work I currently do here in the UK.
Tell us what Voyage does. Tell the audience, and then I'll talk about how I think this could be useful to what you're doing.
So Voyage is a youth justice charity. We were formed by the Black Police Association. A lot of our work was very much about trying to stop young people's interaction with police and leading that to arrest. We were one of the first charities, if not the first charities, to run stop and search workshops, to run workshops around empowering young people in various situations around criminal justice sector. We used to have a very big investment by delivering workshops across London. Voyage was set up to combat young people getting into the criminal justice system. What's happened, that's become quite a crowded space, and a lot of organisations are now doing that. What we've been evolving towards is how we can take that principle of working and using the same approaches, but applying those approaches to different areas, such as the environment and the technology sector. Because one of the things about working with young people through criminal justice is you tend to be talking about deficit agendas, and often you're working with quite a risky group of young people in that space. So the opportunities for their growth is quite minimal, because you've got to have long wraparound support for those type of young people to keep them connected, to stop them from going astray. And what we've struggled with is seeing the progression of those kids after our program. So we decided to design new courses that can create more, if you like, aligned pathways to industry, so that you started to learn about sustainable cities. Great. And then now you make your choice around A-levels. You then start choosing biology, STEM, subjects of that nature. And then you apply for university and do the same. And the idea is ensure that pipeline is nurtured from a younger age, so that you see kids end up in those sectors. And our job is to really just provide the mentoring, the guidance, the workshops and interventions and fun opportunities that help young people in that 4-year journey from 14 to roughly about 18 when they leave Voyage. And what we're really now trying to do is to, because we've seen that work and we're now working on kids who have now graduate, and what we're trying to do is tap those kids to come back to Voyage and act as the sort of peer support for some of those new entry-level kids. And that's plugged into another issue that we found, that many kids in university, black kids in university, are struggling to stay in university because, one, they don't have the finances, they don't have the social circles, and they've lost that connection with their mainstream homes because they've migrated thinking it was a great opportunity. And I've seen roughly about 3 categories emerge of kids who are at uni. You've got some that fly, and we've got an amazing woman, Rachel, who's a graduate. She's actually now just become the chair of the ACS in Cambridge. And she's a really rare case. But most of our students would just about hold it down. And then the other one, like Isaac, for example, he gave up his second year because he just couldn't handle it anymore and chose that he needed to come back and just get into work. And I'm noticing that category of kids who are not able to sustain that kind of period. So we're developing things like alumni programs so that those kids can be more supported where they're in university, and we can offer that through work experience, through mentoring, and we've got partners who give people jobs as well in the summer. So those things have been really helpful for us to kind of ensure that. And we're now taking that model and applying that to technology, and that's why we're working on this plan to have a new course called Young Leader for Smart Cities. We'll do exactly the same thing as sustainability in our Safer Cities program, but effectively we want to see more kids enter tech. That's the other area that we're working on now.
Amazing. I love that. That's a practical change. You've basically created a whole pipeline from the age of 14 to 18, making sure that we're getting them young, getting them interested in areas that they otherwise might not have been interested in, and then hopefully leads to them being in STEM areas for careers, which are quite high paying roles. And we need more of people like us in those type of roles. Same with technology, same with AI, which is the second thing you're working on. The more you talk about it, the more I'm like, yeah, you could really create like some sort of delegation, some sort of program, and get it sponsored somehow. I'm sure you can. Because
these days as well.
Plus, let's not forget, you helped raise 14.5 million. You're pretty good at raising money. If there's a way you can raise some funds and like create some sort of delegation program, especially the sustainable cities one. Climate change affects Africa the most. So you going into these African nations, and because I'm pretty sure there are people there that are also doing stuff to try to combat this, and set up meetings with them and bring the kids and show the kids, first of all, the effects, the people on the ground that are working to fix it and that type of thing, just so they have that deeper connection to the work that they're doing. And I feel like even that will motivate them to stay in university even more. Like, be like, actually, I'm doing this for a greater purpose, not just to make money, but I've seen the effects of this because I was in Ghana or I was here. I saw the beach. Have you seen the beaches in Ghana, by the way? Yeah. I saw something on social media recently with where all the garments.
That King Lega.
I don't know the name of it, but I know it was a beach and the entire thing was just filled with clothes, rubbish clothes. They showed the beach beforehand, which was just clean, and then afterwards just piles, like mountains of clothes.
Yes.
And this is part of climate change. This is the type of things that if they saw that with their own eyes, they'll be like, okay, no, I'm not just doing this to make money. I can actually make a change in the world, and these are my people. Because I don't know, I feel like no matter where I go in Africa, I feel like there's that connection that these are my people. So they might get the same connections.
A lot of people do want to give back or go back, but they just don't know how. So to have someone to facilitate that would be really great. But I was just going to take it a bit back, and I was thinking, being a first generation grad myself in my family, and even being in the field of psychology where it's predominantly white females, seeing people of the global majority succeed and have role models as you're doing and facilitating really helps people. Because when I see another South Asian psychologist, or my colleague who's Ghanaian, we had a lecture and it was a black psychologist, male psychologist, and he was in awe. 30 plus years, he's never seen another black psychologist until that lecture, and how impactful that still is. And people still say to me, oh, I'm being supervised for the first time by somebody of the global majority. And I think it's so important for people to see people like us representing.
Wow, it was so true. When we were reading and learning an awful lot about the environmental sector, what was fascinating was to find that all of the people who had graduated and been through it, none of them, and all the people we spoke to had even a lecture from a black person.
Wow.
And then we got in touch with another young Nigerian guy who's doing a master's, and we found him talking about that particular point, and we amplified his social media as a result. And it's still like that to this very day. There's hardly anyone in those spaces there that look like us. It's one of the things that I always say to our young people is that when you want to rise in this world, like the higher you climb, the colder it gets. Like the higher it gets.
I'm stealing that.
In that kind of way, and it is the absolute truth. And you can actually put that in literal as well, because Andrew, one of my trustees, he works in finance, is one of these big finance people. And he goes that, like, he leaves his house, he's from a black family, he leaves the neighborhood, says how, and in the moment he gets into the city of London, any connection with his identity is left at that reception after he says, yo, how's it going, bruv? And climbs the lift from the security up to the next floor. And that's it. Yeah. He's Andrew. He's and he just tells me that is the mindset that you've got to adopt, and it's something that we need to talk to a lot of kids about, because in many respects, a lot of people don't want to challenge that a lot of the time. They just think, oh no, I'd rather stay here. And I think that is so important, that when you climb that lift, there are people that look like you in every stage, so that you kind of encouraged all the way by virtue of another person being there, living that story as well.
I was going to ask you the question of what do you think can be done to empower African nations, and because that's the question I ask every guest that comes on. But I already think I have an answer for you, which is I want this thing to happen. I want this delegation, what do you call it when you take a group of people and you take them on a program? What do you call that? Is it a delegation, exchange trip?
Yeah, so for us, it depends on the language, beneficiaries, cohorts.
I want you to take a cohort of these young adults, take them on a sustainable program to explore whichever country that's doing amazing things about that, and do all that, and then do the same thing for the tech. Kenya is great for the tech, by the way.
Yes,
Nairobi has an amazing startup ecosystem. And I have connections in Kenya. I actually know the head of a VC firm, actually. Wow. And I have connections for the sustainable thing as well. If you did want to do this, I'm sure I can connect you to people that know people.
One, that connection, even that whole the brain rot, people leaving these countries, it's a great thing that they're creating those ecosystems over there, because we need to see our people stay in Africa rather than leave and come to the West. So when you get there, you're having to start systems from very basic beginnings. So absolutely, 100%. And believe it or not, I have been working on a few international exchange ideas. And one of them is around Ghana, because there's a huge infrastructure around the sort of climate change community.
Okay.
And I know quite a few artists, because I've been touring with artists and doing all sorts of things over the last probably 25 years. My connections over there are quite strong. So I'll probably start there for environment. But in terms of tech and Africa, that's amazing. I'd love to follow that up in terms of the kind of Kenya.
I know people in Ghana too.
This is great.
A lot of my university friends are Ghanaian that I was chilling with in uni.
You went to Unilag?
No, I went to uni in Manchester.
Oh, right.
Yeah, but they came as international students and then they went back to Ghana.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, like I know people in Ghana too, and I feel like Kenya will be great for the tech thing. But just in general, I'm trying to think about it for you. I'm trying to think through the steps, because when I get
I was going to say, this is very Hameed getting excited over an idea. You say what you got to say, but I also want to hear what Paul has to say.
Okay.
But we can peg that one for a bit later. Generally to say, it's very hard to get international funding to do trips and travel today. And
yes, that's what I was going to ask.
Yeah, because when I was a youth worker, there was a very profound case, a boy who went on an international exchange. And because he was an offender, a prolific offender in the community, he went. And it was to Kenya, in that part of East Africa. And he carried on offending in such a way that actually the whole group got sent back to the UK. It reached government. And that led to a real kind of stopping of international exchanges because it was just so out there. And there's been a sort of series of kind of, funding kind of issues that have kind of beset the country over the years that there's never been a chance to really resurrect it. So I haven't seen funding to do it. As I said, Europe's gone.
That was going to be my question. When I was trying to think through it, because I realized that Voyage is a non-profit organization, right? And I'm like, okay, so if it's done through Voyage, then it's going to be a thing where whoever's sponsoring this is just funding it out of the goodness of their heart. I was trying to find a way that you can get someone to fund this and it benefits them in some way as well. Have you thought about that? Like, how can we get this funded and also it benefit the person that's funding it or the organization that's funding it in some way? What value could this cohort add? What do we have that we can give on our side? Whether that's maybe Voyage has a huge platform and you could show off the people that you meet, or maybe those cohort of kids are especially talented and they, I don't know, offer to give some of their time or in exchange for something, or I'm trying to think, mentorship. I don't know, because you did mention those ambassadors are quite intelligent themselves. These young adults are quite intelligent people too. So if there's some sort of mentorship or exchange in some way, that could also add value to the people that are sponsoring it, so that it is not just a donation or a good deed. It is more of an investment. I like that.
It's an investment. And it's like investing in the future, isn't it? It's kind of like getting them to see the possibilities of the outcome of someone who you invest in with that intentioned way to say, go.
Yeah.
Let's see what this does to you in terms of your empowerment, the choices you make, and then how that then potentially can lead to that young person wanting to go back home like me, because I'm planning to go back home and retire there, carry on the work that I do in some way, shape or form there. Yeah, absolutely. And just say like the Manhood Academy, who, Davis and his team, they've established a link in Gambia, and they've linked the idea of manhood and getting young people to go through these various kind of what they call rituals and rites of passage.
Ceremonies.
And these various ceremonies that they've adopted. They've taken a much more sort of spiritual thing, and they've taken a mix of what South African kids do when they walk around. When they reach maturity, they have to walk across the plains and kind of come, and then after that they wear these cloths. He's adopted ideas like that, and he's also introduced a sort of fundraising campaign, so each young person has to raise 50% of that money or 60% of that money through their own means. And I think that they're the sort of ways that we need to look at it today. So you might get an initial investor who might sort of say, look, I'll donate to that cause, and then the youngsters will have to sort of supplement it with their own fundraising kind of idea. So I think it is really possible. The realist things, and I can tell you now, I'm aware of lots of other things that have gone wrong, international things. For example, there was an organisation I knew and worked with where Prakesh, who was the head of cultural cooperation, he actually died while he was on visit to Morocco, Marrakesh. I'm talking probably a good 25, 30 years now. And because he died there, he had this issue about him being repatriated, and I think they weren't able to even afford that, and it created all sorts of issues. And so, just if there's a tragic accident that happens, and I think there's lots of that broader dimension about.
There's a lot of logistics.
Yeah, there's
to think about.
And I think that's also pushing back a lot of others. And health and safety now is like on swole. Everything is guided through safety, health and safety, safeguarding, and it makes that very risky. So it'll have to be that tailored group of kids. And I probably wouldn't want to go with anyone who could potentially go off a stray course. He's so nervous about them.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. In that case, what else, in your opinion, can be done to empower African nations to increase the respect for Black and African people globally?
I think most importantly is making sure that you make a clear commitment to that and do it. We work with Black communities because we're addressing the exclusion and the fact that there's not many provisions are available for these kids.
Yeah,
we want to create safe spaces for them to come together and engage and to be their authentic selves. And our kids access mainstream provision. There's not that opportunity for them to do that. So we want to be that sort of counterbalance where those conversations about identity, themselves and their own futures can be discussed openly. And I think there's such an important place for doing that. And that's why working with Black communities is a really important, essential thing to do and to offer.
You mentioned something as well in the beginning. You said when you got in trouble and you ended up in prison, this was after you had been excluded. And it's something something that I've also heard mentioned by Mr. Vivamoon. It says that the pipeline from exclusion to prison. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
The pipeline from school to prison is very well documented. It really just documents the sort of lack of support for young people from school right the way until they end up getting arrested by police. It's basically a whole system of failures that have not been supported by mainstream society and mainstream schools and system. Like a young person goes to school and they don't necessarily have a strong family background, for example. They may have parents just working and therefore less time and less support for that young person. They're not actually going to get additional support in the school. When the school works out and this child doesn't have that sort of parental support, they're more likely to just sort of leave that young person. They don't champion that young person or invite them to things, and the parents are not there to advocate. So that type of young person falls through all sorts of cracks in their journey right the way through these mainstream institutions. And that's why that pipeline to school to prison exists, because there's just no support for that child as they grow and move.
Does it disproportionately affect Black students? And if so, why do you think that is?
We exist to be role models for our kids. We share our lived experience so that they can look at their own and go, that's normal, that's okay. Maybe not okay, but I can improve that. When they're in a mainstream environment, that experience isn't there. So they don't have those role models. They don't have that trust. They don't have that safe space to have those conversations. And often they're hiding. They don't want that to be known. That will come off in behavior. That will come off in terms of their choices that they make with people. That will be about the identities that they adopt and the suits that they wear to try to look and feel comfortable in a space that they're not really comfortable in. And one of the things when I was a kid, I'd have always the best trainers, always have the top like names and labels. And how do you get that? Well, you've got to steal sometimes to get that. You've got to do, and they're the suits that we wear that give us the veneer that we've arrived somewhere, we're doing well, we're respectable, or should be respected. And often that goes the other way. You end up doing a bit more crime, and then that gets you arrested, that gets you in trouble, that gets you on the naughty step, that gets you targeted, that gets you sort of known for being a certain type of person. The school to prison pipeline remains. And then you've got all the other insidious things, like, for example, teachers that are racist, systems that are racist, and all of the real factors which, when that child turns up, those issues are around them, it's more likely to happen. And unfortunately, that is what's happening to our kids. Whether it's poor advice, I mean, I remember going to fight my case in the court. I didn't tell my parents. I just got a legal person, got the support, thought I was going to beat the case, thought I knew better than my parents and knew better than anybody else. And I ended up going into prison because that was the wrong advice. We don't have the support in the places that are important for us to kind of challenge those ideas that we have. And we don't even know where we get them from. But we somehow look at characters and look at people in the media and we model ourselves on these people, and that becomes a suit that we wear, but actually it's not really us. Hameed, your name is Adigan. Did you ever have a brother who was a dancer and did a dance project in Hackney here, and he did something called Taxi where he danced, his whole troupe danced on a taxi?
No.
Okay. His name was Adigan as well.
Oh,
Maybe a relative.
Yeah, okay.
A long distance cousin.
Yes,
Maybe.
you're on the same frond of the tree, but not necessarily the direct descendant.
Yeah.
You're my son and my daughter.
Hello, son and daughter.
I mean, and
lovely,
Nasria.
beautiful.
My son's 33 and my daughter's 21.
Amazing. Yeah.
I know, I was
cool.
gonna
Similar
say.
ages to me, your son.
Kids' age.
Well, they'll always be your
that's
children, so
right.
regardless of their age.
Of course. They are. Give you a run for your money, my money. Gee.
We're going to wrap up in like 5 minutes. So
lovely.
just
That's amazing.
awesome.
They would be really happy about that because I promised them jolloff at
Nice.
Uncle's
Where?
Grand
In
Corner.
Hackney?
So we have a few. My kind of takeaway spot
Oh, is that the one,
Asser Rock.
Homerton? Hi.
No, that's like Dalston Market. Road in that little small square, Gillette Square, just at the side there, that little Bradbury Street. And then I go to Uncle's, which is Lecky's, which is just Kingsland Road, before you get to the junction of Downham Road, that one, just on the right hand side there. So he does a sort of pilau jollof rather than American rice, like American long grain rice.
He does jasmine style rice.
Yeah. So it's kind of nice.
Cool.
Definitely need to check them out.
Awesome.
Thank you. It's been really interesting. I've learned a lot from you today. And I think I connected a lot to the conversation and resonated a lot, because one of the reasons I'm in psychology is because of this experience of identity, holding multiple identities, especially as someone of the global majority. Wow. How do we consolidate our identities in this process of acculturation? That has been my focus throughout my academic, I want to say life, but I don't think that's...
Academic life, academic term.
So it's one of my specialist interests is acculturation. So how do we manage our dual identities or even tricultural identities, especially in the West? So everything that you've been saying today has been something that I've resonated with, doing research on dual identity conflict in Indian women, for example, and looking at how people who come from collectivist societies and how living in the West and how that impacts. For me, my parents separately migrated at different times. So I'm considered first generation. But I think a lot of the youth, one of the things they struggle with is the key point you've kind of spoken about is sense of belonging throughout. So that I feel like has been the theme of our podcast. And I think a lot of people during their formative years and even afterwards, they're just trying to find a sense of belonging. And what can sometimes happen is that because you want to belong, you end up kind of letting go of your cultural heritage because it's more important to kind of assimilate. Instead of integrating your identities, you tend to assimilate. And then you kind of lose this entire part and identity of you until you get a lot older. And I think that's where people experience a lot of cognitive dissonance or a lot of conflicts, not knowing that you can kind of hold multiple identities. And that's normal. I feel like a lot of people don't understand that that's okay. And they don't have the support network, like you said, to be able to explore that. Which parts of my identity do I really appreciate? And can I have a love of my culture and learn the language? I know growing up, it was cool to speak English and not really know how to speak your mother tongue. But actually, when you grow up, you realize, it's an important skill to be able to do that. And I think what you're doing with your work is you're trying to nurture that back into the youth. And I think that's really important. I don't think growing up, I had that kind of space. I don't think a lot of people have that space. The only good thing now is that because we have social media, we have lots of resources outside, and we also have memes of like our parents asking us to get the controller, or these like very universal kind of jokes that we have in our collectivist cultures. I guess I was just reflecting on that. It's really important in order for people to want to go back to the continent of Africa. They need to first feel a connection to their roots in whatever way that may be, and actually learn that going back is actually a gift. Like you yourself, you went back, you realized, the people over here would do twice or three times more if they had the opportunity. I have that opportunity. So I think being able to nurture that in the youth can also empower them to want to go back. If it's not through this delegation Hameed is talking about, then maybe on their own through the empowerment and through the program that you're hoping to set up in Ghana as well. That's my overall reflection. I really appreciate being able to talk to you today.
No, I appreciate your summary there, and also just the insights you shared and some of the words like the collectivist communities, a term I've bumped into. I might have heard it in a slightly different way. Yeah, absolutely. There is something about how that identity has been a really empowering kind of force for me, in the sense of knowing who I am, not wanting to sort of quote unquote, let the side down and stuff like that. It's all just sort of driven that purpose more. I'm actually planning my retirement with Voyage, and I'm trying to develop a sort of handover strategy to be able to pass on the charity to somebody else to kind of continue it. And that's something that I'm really keen to do. And I've been exploring all sorts of different ways to ensure that some of the ideas that remain intact with Voyage, because someone can quite easily come along and want to do their own thing, which obviously they can do, but I'll want to make sure that there's some tenets in there that remain, like the international project, make sure that's something that we set a goal for in the organisation. And the journey is back to Africa, most certainly. And I think using the themes around the environment and technology and even safety, what we started with around policing, is still really important to keep alive, because that appeals to a lot of kids who see that side of their lives and want to change and come out of it.
Amazing.
Yeah, no, but I'm really grateful for the time and being here, because I'm talking to you about my life. It's sometimes a bit strange as well, because I'm like, often I'm a sort of doy type person, so I just always do things. I sometimes feel kind of strange. I actually never even thought about that bit.
That's the thing. We live in such a busy life. We don't actually get time to sit down and reflect or even reminisce and appreciate.
Yeah, exactly.
I wanted to ask ask about Voyage. Is it something that all Black youth in London can access, or is it focused on a particular borough? So if there are listeners who are interested in engaging, whether that be to mentor or to be part of the programs, like a 14 to 16-year-old, or is 14 to 18-year-olds, how do they become members?
We get our kids through connections with schools, and because we work with schools with youngsters who aren't necessarily doing that well, we get referrals through schools. But we've got age-old connections with schools and people and teachers that we've known over the years, and they always contact me every once in a while and say, what's happening? And they go, I've got a few young people that are available, what are you doing? And then I would share them a link to something, and then they would sign up. So we have kids from all over London joining us. Some of our ambassadors come from as far as Lewisham, Haringey, Tottenham, and of course we're based in Hackney. We've got probably about 70% of our kids are mostly Hackney based. Yeah, but we're open to all kids of colour, no matter where. If you want to make the journey, people like Sam and others, they come from West London. Yeah, a lot of our projects appeal to certain types of kids, and they would come as far as possible just to engage with them, especially like our heritage programme, where we're writing a book on our Windrush elders at the moment. And that really appealed to a really interesting cohort of young people. Yeah, people from all over London can join us anytime. We would never close a door to any young person, even if they were coming from as far as possible. We would do it. We just, how are you going to get home? Do we call your mum? That kind of stuff.
Amazing,
So,
Amazing. In terms of practical advice for our listeners, any other advice that you can offer with regards to things they can do practically from your experience and your life and the work you're doing?
Wow. I think the key to it is talk to real people. Like, you've got this device that's actually probably taking up most of your interaction and communication. Never forget the value of direct contact with people. I always say, like, look at the people who are looking up, and they would tell you that will point to somebody who's doing something different from most people, because everybody else is looking down.
What do you mean by that?
This is the kind of pose. And this is the pose everybody is adopting. Yeah. And for me, when I see somebody looking up, I'm like...
Instead of looking at their phones.
Yeah. And for me, there's something about how that speaks to somebody who's different, thinking different, wired slightly different. And I'm interested in that person. But yeah, I would just say, like, challenge yourself to speak to people older than you in different circles of life. Be vulnerable. Don't feel like you need to hide and pretend and be somebody that you're not. And I think it's things like that I've always found to be quite powerful and transformative, because a lot of us are wrapped up with notions of who we look like, who we are, who we think we are. But actually we'll go home, as I said, when I was, my dad turned up, and how that made me cry for so many days. And I can sort of conjure a tear or two even just thinking about how powerful that was. And I think there's some value in being vulnerable. A lot of us need to learn how to be our authentic selves rather than pretend that being vulnerable is weak. They're the things that will bring people closer to you. And that's something that I've just learned. Be open, talk to people and share.
Mr. Paul Anderson, the advice is to communicate with those that think differently. And you can spot them by seeing those that aren't always on their phone. Instead of looking down on their phone, they're just looking up.
Looking around, they're like, whoa, that's great. That's amazing. That's cool.
Yeah, kind of in reality instead of in the virtual reality and escaping. Yeah, being present and mindful.
Exactly. Trying to feed their dopamine, aren't they? Like, literally. But like, find it. It's out there. I ride a bicycle and I never leave home without it. It's just things like that.
It's commitment, Hameed. You need to learn.
Oh, wow.
That clothes that you wear when you're ride a bicycle, that's it. Literally, I have like 3 sets of clothes. I'll have a jacket in case someone turns up for a meeting. I've got my rain jacket in case I have to nip out and get my trousers in the event that the rain splashes so much I'm going to muddy my trousers.
It's a skill, to be honest, to navigate this weather, and especially as a cyclist.
It's becoming one of them things now. It's like torrential rain now. It's not just navigating floods. They're the things. Just do things differently. I remember when I drove my car into the wall and got rid of it because I got arrested and it got attacked. The police knew me in that car all the time when I was about 17, 18. I got a bicycle and I'll never forget my colleagues going, "What are you riding a bicycle? You got books in your hand. What you got books in your hand? What you got a bicycle in your hand?" He said, "Look, I'm going to college. I'm going to do this." My friends just couldn't actually understand that. They were like, "What's got into you?" I kind of felt like quite a little bit ashamed and embarrassed by that. But as I started to do it more, met people doing that more often, I realized actually this is normal for a lot of people.
Yeah.
You only get that by interacting and meeting people doing those different things. So that's why I was like, get out there, talk, share.
Be authentic.
Amazing.
Find your
find your people.
Be authentic, network, and find your people. by finding your people, we mean find people that think differently, people that aren't afraid to step outside the box.
And through
Absolutely.
that,
I
you'll
love
find
that.
you.
I like that.
Oh, ooh. Okay. Thank you so much for your time, Paul. I appreciate this.
It's been a wonderful pleasure as well.
Me coming through, talking about this Africans are funny, dude. Yo, why they gotta be so prideful? Everybody knows Africa is suicidal.